All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us during this call. My name is Fanyam Wendy. I'm the founder of the STEM Advocacy Institute, SAI, based in Boston. We are starting a new series of conversations regarding SciComm and COVID-19. We want to get to know what people are doing, what they're not doing, some of the challenges they're facing, and really get to what they think the future holds. So these are practitioners, people on the field, on the ground, who are building initiatives, building toolkits, really trying to get the message out about COVID-19. And so we're trying to understand what they're doing and so forth. And today, our first guest in this series is Jamie L. Vernon, Dr. Jamie L. Vernon. He's the Executive Director and CEO of SigmaXi's Society, which is an international honor society for scientists and engineers. He's a dad, he's a scientist, he's a SciCommer, he's a SciPolar, as he describes on Twitter. So I'm excited to learn about him and what he's doing, what his organization is up to. So Jamie, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll get going.
Sure. Thank you, Fanil, for having me and the STEM Advocacy Institute. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the work of SigmaXi and to really share some ideas perhaps that others can learn from today. To give you a little background, you covered my title currently as the Executive Director and CEO of SigmaXi, as well as publisher of American Scientist magazine. So it's interesting that I feel like I'm somewhat in the mid-career stage for myself, but this position allows me to do a lot of the work that I had always, in many ways, dreamed of doing as I was in graduate school and doing postdocs and then trying to figure out my career path. I think I landed in a pretty good place because SigmaXi, one of our mission pillars is to promote public understanding of science. So, background-wise, I think I follow a lot of the path of a lot of folks who are passionate about science, earned a PhD, and then thought maybe there's other opportunities for me beyond academia or strictly research. So I transitioned from the research bench to a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Energy. And in that position, I actually requested not to take a communications position because I really wanted to understand policy and how policy was done. And I was technically a strategic policy analyst, but I did take a portion of my time and volunteer to work with the US Global Change Research Program, which is a program out of the White House. And we basically were working on coordinating some of the federal communication strategies around climate change. It's that volunteer time that actually led to my relationship with SigmaXi and allowed for me to share my experience and with the organization in regards to digital communication strategies. And that led to the position where I was working with American Scientists as the editor-in-chief of the magazine, but also director of science communications and publications for the society. So my path is different from a lot of people's, but I think it can be informative or instructive for looking for opportunities and taking advantages of those.
Yeah, I think your journey is actually inspiring, just hearing a little bit about it. I think we'll probably need to have you back and talk more about those decision points.
Oh, I'd love to talk about that, yeah.
So for now, I just want to get a little bit more, COVID-19 has really had a huge impact, in terms of science communication. I think with what Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx are doing out there, and really a whole slew of people, right? A whole army of people that are doing this work. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about what's your response been to COVID-19 so far? What are some of the initiatives that you've been trying to do? Let's just start there.
Well, just like everyone else, we, with the emergence of the virus and its arrival in the United States, personally, I had to take into account how I was going to respond. And then also, as executive director of SigmaXi, I had to have the employees of the organization in mind. So we took all the precautions. We were one of the early organizations to have a work from home policy. We instituted a travel suspension quite early. So all of that affects SigmaXi and myself, just like just like anyone. But in addition to that, we wanted, as a scientific organization, we knew that we were uniquely positioned to leverage our membership, which is composed of multidisciplinary scientists, to reach out to them and identify anyone with expertise and then connect them with opportunities to talk about the virus and its spread. So we connected with the Federation of American Scientists and some of our members so that they could participate in a chat bot that was essentially answering questions from the public. And then we started to produce our own content. So I started working with Brian Mallow, who's known as Science Comedian. But he and I were talking about the very serious issue of science communication around COVID-19. And he had some questions and thought he would like to engage scientists in an informal way to get at some of the questions that the average person might have. So we started producing those videos and releasing those on the website and social media. They've been quite well received and pretty effective at communicating on some specific issues. One of the challenges to that is that we were doing that very early in the understanding of the virus. And even during this short period, our understanding of the virus has changed. So we've actually had to go back and correct some of the things that we were reporting early, such as pets were not thought to be able to transmit the virus. But then when they had the case of the tigers at the, I think it was the Cincinnati Zoo or one of the zoos that became infected, then suddenly we had to go back and correct the record on whether or not pets could transmit the virus. So that was one of the first things we did. I also encouraged American Scientist editors to start ramping up our blogging because American Science is not a news publication. We generally create what we call evergreen articles, which are really deep dives on a topic with a lot of context. And we publish bi-monthly, but we do have blogs. So we started reaching out to experts in the area of related to COVID-19, everything from epidemiology to molecular biology, and trying to get some of those facts out and information out through the blogs. Today's a great day because I get to announce that we reached a $10,000 mark in our Giving Tuesday fundraiser to support SciComm Make, which is a project we recently launched to bring scientists and artists together to create science communication projects. And we thought we would like to raise some funds to be able to support more of those projects and have them specifically focus on COVID-19. So that's just a few of the things that we're doing, but there's so much more that's ongoing, and we're continuing to look for opportunities.
That's fantastic. There's a lot you guys are doing. And so for those who are watching this now, you should go to your website, would you say? Right, all this information?
Sure. Go to SigmaXi's.org or AmericanScientist.org, and you can see some of the work that we're putting out. I think it might be easier to find our COVID-19 stuff through social media. So if you follow me or SigmaXi or American Scientist on social media, you'll see, because we're constantly putting out new stuff.
Right, and we'll put the information down below in the chat box on YouTube. So just to go back to a little bit, so we did a survey on Twitter, and we asked SciCommers, actually our community, how has COVID-19 impacted you and your work, especially in SciComm? And we saw a bimodal distribution. Some people where things picked up a lot. Sounds like you're probably in that camp. And then there were people where it actually impacted them negatively, like it slowed them down quite a bit, right? So in terms of just in this time, right, where you're, if you're a SciCommer, what has been for you guys has been an uptick, but what's your take in terms of in the SciComm field? How should people be responding or preparing themselves? Because it is difficult for some, and for some it's getting an uptick. Is that dynamic?
Yeah, I think that SigmaXi was able to ramp up because we have been transitioning to more and more virtual engagement. And so if you're interested in science communication or you're involved in science communication, it's important for you to be very savvy in a digital way and prepared to use social media and virtual platforms to engage. SigmaXi runs something that is very local. It's called a pizza lunch. And it's just local scientists from the Research Triangle area where we're located get together, and we usually have a science talk. But we quickly flipped that into a virtual event, and we've had 2 of those already quite successfully. For those who are just new to science communication and thinking about how they should be responding, you really could be tracking what the latest news is. You could be pitching magazines and journals and newspapers for articles. I've been surprised that a couple of folks have reached out to me from news organizations for interviews to talk about the virus. I mean, I worked on HIV vaccines for a while, so I can speak to the issue, but I think that the news agencies are hungry for science expertise. So make yourself known as a science communicator or as a scientist who has some knowledge of the topic, and then reach out to your local news agencies. There's a good chance they'll take you up on the offer.
Right, you gotta be almost relentless, right? Trying to put yourself out there and so forth. Let me ask you this: what is how do you measure, I guess, impact on your side, right? And especially this ties into who's your audience in a way, right? Because the audience is massive, right? We talk about not the public, but the publics, right? The S at the end there. So who's your audience?
Well, SigmaXi is a member-based organization, so we traditionally speak to our members. American Scientist Magazine is a publication primarily or originally intended to help scientists from one discipline speak to scientists in another discipline. So our editors help a biologist write an article that a physicist could understand. That's the magazine. But when we do a lot of our social media and blogging, part of what I brought to SigmaXi was an effort to focus more on the public. And so in this particular era, it's very clear that there are lots of folks who aren't familiar with virology and epidemiology. And we knew that we could relieve some of that stress and answer some of those questions. So we started out just sharing links from other news agencies that we called a COVID-19 preparedness kit. It was just the latest news from trustworthy sites. So an organization like SigmaXi, which focuses on ethics and integrity, we felt that it was important for us to identify trustworthy sources of information in the early days. And then we wanted to start producing our own so that folks would know that they're getting it from the experts. Right. And I think that that was one of the most important things and most important roles we could play.
Right, right. Because I think the audience really does matter, right? You gotta think about who am I talking to. If you're doing YouTube, if you're, doing Instagram, who's your audience, and what kind of messaging are you trying to communicate, right? And you mentioned earlier that you kind of had to go back, right, to some of the content you initially put out and update and maybe even correct at some points, right?
We corrected for the record for sure.
So how do you deal with that uncertainty?
We really viewed that as an educational moment, a teaching moment, because it allowed us, Brian did a great job of changing the introduction to the video to say, this is how science works. We operate on the best available evidence. And when that evidence changes, we change our position. And so there's nothing to be disappointed when the information changes about it. We just have to take that into our decision making and operate in a new way. And that was really viewed as a teaching moment for us. We wanted to educate our audience, not only on the science of the virus, but on the process of science. So they're prepared as we continue to go through this process of learning about COVID-19 to embrace new information.
Right, and I think it's a challenge as well. How do you know what you're doing is having an impact, especially now with COVID-19 right now? What kind of metrics or what are you using that tells you that what you is working?
So that's actually more difficult. We are very much in a broadcasting mode, which means we're putting out as much information, reliable information as we can. The best indicator is when people give us positive feedback and say, thank you for this information. I've been able to use it this way or that. And so we always complete or finish any product that we produce with, if you have questions, contact us, or if you want more information. And that creates that two-way communication that lets us know we're on the right path. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback to the products that we've put out. And that for now is the best that we can do in terms of impact. The others, the obvious metrics, how far is your reach, how many clicks and views do you get on your videos and that sort of thing. So those are the intermediate indicators, but we feel like we're getting fair dissemination, and that's a good sign.
Yeah. And so what do you feel like for SciComm at this stage, right? COVID-19 has, as I like to say, it's been a stimulus in a way. It could be viewed as a stimulus for SciComm. But for now, though, like where are we going in this space? Well, how should people in this space, people wanting to get into this space, be thinking about science communication?
How should they be thinking about science communication? I think that what's really evident right now is that there is a pivot in society towards the scientific community to say, we recognize your expertise in this area. And whether this is your area of expertise or not, science communicators tend to be generalists, and they can themselves pivot to different topics and communicate them effectively, because the skill set is taking complex information and making it accessible to audiences that can't always understand the more complex way that we communicate about it. So I would say that what you can learn today is that when the opportunity presents itself, you should be prepared to respond to what your audience needs. And so we really want to, I would say that the science communication community would want to take advantage of the trust that the public is giving us, and maintain that trust by continuing to provide reliable information and practice good science communication ethics. You would essentially borrow or take the principles of journalism and check all your sources and make sure that there are multiple concurrences with the statements that you're making. So those types of things are going to build more and more confidence in the public for scientists and science communicators. And this is a moment for us to build on that. Earlier, you mentioned what are the challenges, and I think the biggest challenge right now is misinformation. And the conflict of the public health recommendations with the economic implications of what the solutions are is creating an environment for folks who want to push back against the science because it's undercutting their economic interests. And that is a metaphor for almost every problem we have in science communication. When science runs into economic interests, then there's the pushback, and we have to be prepared to handle that misinformation. And what I was saying earlier about we're just broadcasting, I think the key is to flood the space with good information to try to drown out the bad information. That's really the only way I can see us overcoming this problem of pseudoscience that's creeping in, as well as just purposeful misinformation. And we have, as scientists, we have to stay true, and we have to stay committed, and we have to be, as you said, perseverant in getting the messages out there.
I think that's a very powerful message. And I think I like the fact that you are working and collaborating with other entities and starting up these new initiatives to connect scientists and artists, right? And combining elements of journalism. I think that's, for my end, I think I see those connections taking place in SciComm going to a place of really having an impact when you bring all these components together and combating things like misinformation. Jamie, this has been fantastic. And so if you guys want more, we can totally go for hours, but what you do, please to visit his website. We'll put it down on our chat below on YouTube, and look forward to the next guest that we'll be chatting on soon. So Jamie, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Hopefully I'll see some of your audience in my SciComm Make projects that are upcoming.
Wonderful, thanks.
Take care.